Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming. We just wanted to give some folks a couple minutes to come in. So please come in if you're still coming in. I know we are. First of all, I want to say kudos to everybody who could make a Monday morning conference between the traffic, the weather, the parking, and everything else. Really appreciate you being here. And we're only a few minutes late, and maybe we can catch up because I'm only going to talk for a couple minutes. My name is Linda Aldori, and I am the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at American University. And I want to actually begin this conference with my appreciations. First of all, to the Center for inviting me to welcome you all to its annual conference today. And then to the conference sponsors, and all of you who made generous contributions to allow today's events and last night events to happen. Jamie and Andrew Schwartzberg, David and June Trone, Alan and Amy Meltzer, the School of Public Affairs, and the Department of Politics, Governance, and Economy in the School of International Service. I want to begin with some headlines. 2 doctors on opposite sides of the culture war tearing Israel apart, from the Washington Post a few days ago. The ground is cracking under Netanyahu's feet, opinion page of the Post in July. An Israeli city where compromise and division swim side by side, New York Times. A divided Israel stands at a perilous crossroads on its 75th birthday, CNN. And for those of you who may not have seen it yet, today's New York Times headline, "Wounds will need to be healed, collisions in a fractured Israel." Opposite sides, divided, fractured, tearing apart. When I read these headlines about Israel, it reminds me of the bridge metaphor and how decisions to build bridges and to cross them are fraught with tensions and emotions. Today's conference theme directly reflects these headlines: a nation torn, recognizing the gaps and building bridges in Israel's society. The conference addresses the most pressing issues facing Israel. It has brought together a world-class group of scholars and activists to share their expertise and insights on the current political and social crises, the proposed judicial reform, and the ongoing civil unrest. Today's programming reflects the renewed focus of the Center for Israel Studies on building bridges and promoting inclusivity. American University established the center in 1998 and celebrates 25 years of providing multidisciplinary and pluralistic approaches to examining Israel's history, its diverse society and culture, and its complex geopolitical challenges. Also this year, through the generous support of Amy Meltzer, Board of Trustees member Alan Meltzer, and AU friends Jamie and Andrew Schwartzberg, the newly named Meltzberg-Schwartzberg Center for Israel Studies will seek to catalyze the field of Israel studies and create opportunities for dialogue and programming, just like this, that will build bridges between nations, cultures, and religions. The center mission is in direct line with the vision for a liberal arts, science, education today espoused by the College of Arts and Sciences to advance critical thinking, problem solving, creative expression, and analytical skills for the students who are change makers of tomorrow. The liberal arts and sciences is the heart of American University, and the Meltzer-Schwartzberg Center for Israel Studies is the representative model for students' experiential learning, scholarly inquiry, and bridge building. And I want to thank you for letting me kick off today. And now I'd like to introduce the director of the Meltzer-Schwartzberg Center for Israel Studies, Dr. Michael Brenner.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for your continuing support. And I know you have a very always very full schedule, so thanks for being here, as always. I wish, in a way, and I won't make another opening. I'll basically just open the session, don't worry. I did that last night. I wish we would be here at a at an easier and happier moment in Israel, where we would concentrate on things we have done before, on the amazing cuisine of Israel. We had a great conference with like 800 people, with food scholars and chefs and everything, or on a conference we used to have on the kibbutz, which was a wonderful occasion as well, and many cultural and scientific achievements, which Israel, without any doubt, has achieved. But this is a very critical moment of Israel, and we decided to have a conference focusing on not only what's going on today, but also how did we get there, and maybe what are the possibilities to get out of this. So these are some of the questions which we will deal with today, hopefully, with our many panelists, most of them coming in from Israel just for this conference. This first panel will deal with one of the gaps in Israeli society that has been obvious for many years, but I think more so over time, and that's the religious secular gap. But it's not as easy. It's a complicated situation where you have the Haredi population, which is the ultra-Orthodox. You have a national religious population. You have several shades of people who call themselves traditional Jews and secular Jews. So it is, as so much in Israel, a bit complicated. In a recent contribution to the newspaper Haaretz, best-selling historian Yuval Noah Harari asked the provocative question, can Judaism survive a messianic dictatorship in Israel? He compared the contemporary national religious settlers and their allies, many of them in Israel's present government, to the zealots of the first century, with the added notion that this time they might be victorious and create what he called a Jewish supremacist state. And he asked, imagine a world in which Judaism becomes a synonym for religious fanaticism, racism, and brutal oppression. Could Judaism survive such a spiritual destruction, which is different from the physical destruction of the Second Temple? And he continues, will religious Zionism ever find a way back from the abyss of what he calls, after the riots by extremist settlers in the Arab town of Huwara, Judaism? And that's pretty tough stuff, and it's a very serious opinion he's uttering here. The mere fact that a worldwide respected intellectual authority, who is not seen as particularly left-wing or extremist, can even ask such a question is frightening. But it leads us right into the central issues of this panel. What is the Jewish character of the Jewish state, and how did it change over time? We discussed this yesterday critically, the four different tribes which President Ruvi Rivlin spoke about in his famous speech in 2015, the secular Jews, the religious Jews, the ultra-Orthodox, and the Arab Israelis, are the bridges between the different segments. Let's not call them tribes, I don't think it's a good expression, between the different segments of Israeli society breaking down, and are those bridges falling, and what can we do to actually strengthen them? How did we get there, and where are we going from here? To answer these questions, we have gathered a formidable group of scholars from the US and Israel who will speak in the following order. The order is a little different than in the program. First, Professor Alexander Kaye will lead us into the historical aspects of the development of Israel's Orthodox society. He is the director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University. Dr. Kaye's latest book, The Invention of Jewish Theocracy, The Struggle for Legal Authority in Modern Israel, is a history of the idea that the state of Israel should be governed by halacha. And among other awards, it received the Baron Prize from the American Academy for Jewish Research and the Leon Charney Book Award from Yeshiva University. Unfortunately, Alexander Kaye's plane was canceled from Boston, and he will join us on Zoom. But before he speaks, let me also introduce the other speakers in the order they will present. He will be followed by Dr. Gilad Malach, who is the director of the Ultra-Orthodox in Israel program and a research fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute. His doctoral dissertation on public policy regarding the ultra-Orthodox community won the Israel Political Science Association's Best Dissertation Award. His research focuses on public policy as it pertains to the ultra-Orthodox in various fields, including on issues critical to the community's integration to Israel's economy and society. And he will be followed, and I'm happy to welcome back to American University, Professor Dan Ben David, who founded and heads the Shoresh Institute for Socioeconomic Research and teaches in the Department of Public Policy at Tel Aviv University. In 2023, he received the Knight of Quality of Government Award, and in previous years he was named Person of the Year by the Kalkalist newspaper and included 3 times in Haaretz newspaper's list of the 100 most influential people in Israel. He is among the 10 most cited economists in Israel and has twice received Tel Aviv University's Best Teacher Award in the social sciences. And finally, our respondent this morning is former Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, Dr. Ruth Calderon, who many of you have already heard last night in our opening panel. She has worked for decades to build bridges between secular and religious Jews in Israel. As an educator and Talmud scholar, she cultivated the study of Torah in the secular world. And she founded 2 very, I would say, special and wonderful institutions, Beit Midrash Elul in Jerusalem and Alma, Home for Hebrew Culture in Tel Aviv. She also served as the head of the Culture and Education Department of the National Library of Israel in recognition of her work. So I see Dr. Kaye already on our screen, and I suggest that the panelists will stay because of the screen where they are now, and then we'll move on to our panel.
Thank you so much, Professor Brenner, for that kind introduction. And I just want to say how sorry I am that I can't be there in person, both because it's just better to be there with you all in the audience, and especially I wanted to reconnect with some of my friends at AU and especially meet my distinguished fellow panelists, but the weather had other ideas, sadly. What I propose to do in just a very few minutes is to give a brief historical overview of religious Zionism, or the national religious sector of Israeli society. As Professor Brenner pointed out, the term religious in Israel has so many meanings that it almost ceases to have a meaning. So we're going to be focusing on the sector that's called Tzioni Dati, or sometimes Dati Leumi. I'll give a brief historical overview of the development of that sector of Israeli society to give some sense of how we ended up in the situation that we're in. And I also want to provide a couple of, this conference is talking about a nation torn, but also the possibility of closing gaps. And I wanted to end this very brief opening mini talk with some ways that there is some possibility of hope and some glimmers of good stuff on the horizon, even despite the fairly bleak picture that we see in the news every day. So let me give a brief historical taxonomy of religious Zionism. Religious Zionism, the history of religious Zionism, is often split by historians roughly into 3 periods. If anyone's interested in the question and answer session, I will happily tell you about how these distinctions actually are not as rigid or as clean as they may seem, but it's a helpful taxonomy. And we may first look at religious Zionism from really the early 20th century, especially the 1920s onwards, all the way through the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, roughly up until the Six-Day War in 1967. And the key political groups that made up this phase of religious Zionism were Mizrahi, which was basically a more or less centrist religious party, and Hapoel Mizrahi, which was clearly a left-wing socialist workers' religious political party. These two groups themselves sometimes were on the same page, sometimes were not, but they made up the thrust of what was considered to be religious Zionism at the time, which was obviously a group of people that were committed to traditional Jewish law, and a group of people that believed that Zionism was leading to some kind of fulfillment of that religious law. But politically speaking, largely these people were pragmatists, and they were politically speaking moderates. That's not to say that their religious ideas lacked passion or commitment, on the contrary, but these passionately held religious commitments included the values of unity of the Jewish people, the success of the state of Israel, even if it's not technically legally a religious state, and also had a very clear sort of socialist bent, as you can see by this early election poster for Hapoel Mizrahi, talking about the religious worker and the importance of that in the Israeli political sphere. Things began to change after the 1967 war, and especially after the 73 war, with the rise of a new kind of ideology that was propagated mainly by the man that you see in the photograph here in the background of the slide, surrounded by his students. This is Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, teaching in the yeshiva that his father, Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Kook, had founded decades earlier. Tzvi Yehuda Kook was somebody who took the very kind of mystical, esoteric teachings of his father and converted them into a very politicized, nationalist, still mystical, still religious, but far more specifically practically nationalist ideology that understood the state of Israel to be a messianic state of cosmic significance. This meant that the success of the state of Israel, which would, he believed, eventually turn to a religious commitment that it didn't have in its founding years, that this state, with its success, would bring about a redemption, not just for the Jewish people, but for all of reality, all of existence. That was the kind of mystical vision of his father that he channeled and gave to his students. His students, who many of whom were fairly young people and don't forget, this is the 60s we're talking about, took this and ran with it. It kind of melded the mystical messianism of this kind of sagely rabbi and combined it with a youthful rebellion to become, in time, one of the powerful forces behind Gush Emunim, which was one of the great forces behind the establishment of the settler movement in the 1970s. Here is the later famous Israeli politician Hanan Porat as a young man. And you can see the kind of brotherhood and the ecstasy and the sort of youthful rebellion that came, that accompanied this group as it pushed its religious commitments and converted them to this sort of more nationalist messianic sentiment. Until the beginning of the 21st century, this really represented the mainstream of religious Zionist ideology. But things slowly began to change during the 90s and especially in the early 2000s. And this leads to the third stage, I would say, of the development of religious Zionism, which began with what was considered to be the failure by this group of the Oslo Accords. After all, if the state of Israel is a messianic state of cosmic significance, how do you understand the fact that the state gave away some of the ancient biblical homeland during the Oslo Accords? And this sense of abandonment really intensified, especially in 2005-06 with the disengagement from Gaza, and led to a change in ideology, or the eruption of a new kind of ideology around religious Zionists, which ironically one may call post or even anti-Zionist. There are different strands of this particular kind of ideology, which I'm happy to elaborate on in questions if anybody's interested. But there are strands of this ideology represented by people like Bezalel Smotrich, which says that the state essentially is not important, except insofar as it facilitates a very fundamentalist, very biblical literalist vision of Jewish history, where Smotrich essentially sees himself as a modern-day Joshua from the book of Joshua, reconquering the land of Israel. And he's completely disillusioned with this idea of the secular, liberal, leftist, Ben-Gurion style Ashkenazi elites running the show. He's totally committed to his very dogmatic fundamentalist idea of Israeli politics and religion. And people like his colleague in the Knesset and in the government, Itamar Ben-Gvir, have what may even be called an anti-Zionist perspective, which is to say, people like Ben-Gvir and certainly many of his spiritual leaders couldn't care less about the state of Israel, in effect want to take it over or even replace it with a theocratic state. Now, I'm not going to get in right now to what percentage of religious Zionists have these exact ideologies. These people, the more extreme ideologues who represent these positions still, I would say, represent not a majority of religious Zionism. I'm certain of that. But there are many, even those who are not actually in that camp, who are sort of understand it or are sympathetic to it or see the point that these people appear to be making. And so these positions, quite apart from their political power in the current government, are very significant. Professor Brennan mentioned the horrific attack on Juarez in February 2023, and I want to just sort of focus on these young men here in the picture and try to take a moment, just 1 minute, to, I'm not going to say defend this position, which is clearly undefensible, but in the interest of scholarly integrity, to try and think about where these people are coming from. Where do they see this ideology coming from in the way that they justify it to themselves? These people essentially believe that they have been abandoned by a hypocritical left-wing takeover of Zionism. Let's not forget that it was the centrist and left-wing parties that were fully in favor of the settlement movement in the 1970s and the 1980s. Whereas nowadays, having subsidized and encouraged people to live in the settlements, these people are now telling them that they have to leave the settlements and leave the homes that they've lived in for generations. Moreover, these young people are looking at the establishment of the State of Israel and think that all of these people care about is this, is a gleaming neoliberal Tel Aviv, which is bereft of any Zionist ideology, bereft of any Jewish spirit. The Zionist movement has essentially abandoned, they feel, what is the most important thing to Judaism. And therefore, they have this kind of romantic zeal, similar to the German romantics of the 18th and 19th century, where they want to get back to the land, want to get back to a kind of what they consider to be an authentic spiritualism, even if that quote-unquote authenticity or sincerity leads to eruptions of violence, anger, or revenge. At least they would say it's real emotion, it's real ideology, and not some kind of abandonment of Zionism and Judaism that the state for them represents. To be clear, again, I'm not justifying this position, but I'm trying to illustrate how these people see themselves. I'm going to end just with 2 minutes of, again, maybe a silver lining to this situation, which is to say that although this picture that I painted of contemporary religious Zionism is very real and very present, there are alternative aspects, alternative strands or vectors in the history and the present of religious Zionism that offer alternative perspectives. We can go right back to the founding of the state. These are the first two chief rabbis, the Ashkenazic chief rabbi Herzog on the left and Uziel, the Sephardic chief rabbi Chacham Bashi on the right, who represented far more moderate, unifying, pragmatic religious perspectives, which I'm, again, happy to elaborate on. The history of religious Zionism is not only the history of this kind of extremist ideology. And even in more recent years, there have been many kinds of alternatives. For example, Rabbi Yehuda Amital, who was born in Hungary and as a child discovered the writings of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook that were later used to create a very sort of ethno-nationalist extremist ideology. he found these writings so important, he smuggled them with him into a concentration camp during the Shoah. But when he emerged, he was not an extremist nationalist by any means. In fact, he founded a political party, a religious moderate political party, which didn't last very long, but it represented this other strand in religious Zionism that sees things differently. There are also all different interesting theological developments in contemporary religious Zionism. Here is Dr. Tamar Ross, a very profound theologian who talks about Abraham Isaac Cook's theology, again, not as a precursor to some kind of hyper-nationalism, but instead as a way of embracing doubt and change and difference within the Jewish community and also beyond. And very recently in Jerusalem, just at the beginning of this year, there was the first conference of what was called the Small Emuni, the religious or the faithful left, which represented very, very many groups of people who find themselves to be in the religious Zionist camp with all kinds of religious halachic commitments, but who object to the way that things have been going among religious Zionism today. Finally, there is an equally important, extremely important movement in Israeli society, which gets to what Professor Brandeis said at the beginning about how the division between secular and religious in Israel is really not as clean-cut as we may think. And of course, we have Calderon, who founded the Alma house in Tel Aviv some years ago. But this represents a critical movement in Israel where people who have not historically been considered to be quote unquote religious are saying that the religious traditions of Judaism do not only belong to one particular camp or a Haredi camp or a Dati Leumi camp. It can belong to all of Israel, all of Jews and other people as well. And it's up to us to kind of take that back and do with it what we want by really owning it and pushing that forward with a different kind of agenda. So all of these pictures represent other kinds of alternatives. I'm not saying that this is a rosy picture in Israeli society today, but this is not only ruptures. There is a possibility of some kind of change for the better if these trends can be strengthened and empowered further.
In the last 25 years, Israel has changed. And when I'm talking about change, I'm focusing on the social rifts. And it is connected to what Alexander just said. He focused on secular religious rift, social rift. But nowadays, the main social rift within the Jews in Israel is between secular and some of the religious, modern religious, and the ultra-Orthodox and the Haredim. Just to show you, at the late 90s, showing you that 25 years ago the main rift was secular religious. At that time, most of the social, cultural initiative to build bridges at that time were connected to secular religious social rift. The Kinneret Declaration, Gavizon Meidan Covenant. What was the idea? Gavizon Meidan Covenant was a very important initiative, and most of the politicians at that time saw that this is the solution between secular and religious Jews. And what are the main questions of Gavizon and Meidan? What are the main issues? They were dealing about Shabbat in Israel, about marriage and divorce, about conversion, and issues like that. You can say social and cultural issues. 25 years later, we are talking about a totally different social rift when we focus on secular and some of the modern religious people and the Haredim, or the Haredim and the state. Why is it much more deeper rift? I would say that there are two main reasons for that. First of all, the common ground between Haredim and secular people. There is much less common ground if we are talking about Israel as a Jewish state, as a democratic state, as a prosperous state, as a welfare state, secular people explain these terms in one way, and the Haredim understand it totally different. When they refer to Jewish state, they don't understand it as a cultural, traditional aspect, but more towards halachic understanding of these terms. Their understanding of democratic state is very narrow, meaning that they are recognizing the existence of elections, free elections, and the principle of majority rules, but just it. This is democracy. I mean, not including civil rights, minority rights, unless it is ultra-Orthodox rights. And also, prosperous state is not part of their vision. I mean, their vision is focused on religion, on the religious status. I mean, they prefer that people, their men, will study Torah most of their life instead of work and earning money. So if they need to decide, I mean, they don't. I mean, nowadays, when Israel it is a prosperous state, they are really happy with that, with this support. But they prefer, in their ideology, they prefer living in a poverty, but being religious, but focusing on Torah studies. So in that term, when sometimes, we identify the ultra-Orthodox society as an enclave culture, I just want, when I'm explaining this ideology, the enclave culture is just the framework, is just their way in order to preserve their ideology. But the gap between their ideology and the ideology of the secular people, and I believe most of the modern religious people, is huge. And this is the reason why they want to keep their enclave culture, because they really believe in something totally different. The second reason why this rift is much deeper than the previous rift between Jews and secular and religious people is that the current situation of the ultra-Orthodox society, the current situation and the future, in the future, it's not viable in five elements. According to the economy, I mean, the fact that especially ultra-Orthodox men are not educated to the modern labor market, and the fact that when you aggregate the percentage of the ultra-Orthodox man who works and their earning, when you aggregate it together, ultra-Orthodox men in the labor market, main labor ages between 25 and 64 earns 1/3 compared to non-Haredi worker. 1/3. I mean, it's 50% compared to almost 90%, and they are earning 50%. The men who are working earn 50%. So when you took the two of it together, it's 1/3. It's not viable. I mean, and if today the effect just to the taxes today is around 10 billion shekels, in 30 years it will be 8 times more, and it is not viable. It's not viable socially. I mean, the tensions between the group will be much deeper. It's not viable regarding democracy because of the different values. It's not viable regarding equality. I mean, even when we are talking about serving in the army, if today the ultra-Orthodox are just 20% of each quota. In the future, there will be 25% and 30%. In 2050, there will be 40%. I mean, regarding equalities, it's not viable. And also equality regarding Arabs. The ultra-Orthodox point of view regarding Arabs is not that they are part of the state. And the last thing is connected to infrastructures. Because of the fact that the ultra-Orthodox society grows rapidly, it would be very hard to the state to build so rapidly a fine infrastructure regarding hospitals and other infrastructures. So before answering the question, which bridge can we build, I can say that until now, there was a paradigm of what to do regarding the ultra-Orthodox, how to integrate them especially into the labor market. There was a paradigm at the last 20 years, especially public policy makers, and the main paradigm was to integrate them, but not to harm their autonomy. I call it integrative enclave, meaning we, the state, will build frameworks that will be fully segregated, but this framework will build the way for them to integrate. For example, it is very hard for them to go to regular universities because it's very hard to them to study men and women together, to study with secular people. Okay, so the content of the university, the colleges, will be the same content, but they will have their own campuses. The same thing regarding the serving in the army. We will build them special units for the same reasons. A same thing regarding vocational training, advice centers for jobs. The same concept. We will give you let's say, the secular content, but in a Haredi framework. And that will be the way to integrate you at the end of the day, integrate you in the regular society, the secular society, the labor market. But I can tell you that after 20 years, the results, let's say, are mixed. I mean, there are more men, Haredi men that work today, but not enough. And when we refer to their earnings, 20 years ago, they earned 50%. I mean, Haredi men who works, they earn 50%. Nowadays, it's almost the same. So there wasn't a change in their earning. Even they're earning a bit less than 20 years ago. So, and we can take this analysis regarding to each subject, but this is an example that the results are not good enough. Now, in order to think about solutions, we need to portray three scenarios regarding to what might be regarding the integration process of the ultra-Orthodox society, especially in the labor market. One option is that, as I told you, some of the Haredim integrated in the labor market. Regarding women, it was even, there were higher achievements. They are working almost at the same percentage like non-Haredi women, although they are earning, again, much less. But one scenario is that we already achieved the balance of the Haredi society between learning, Torah learning, and working. We already achieved. I mean, the situations that half of them are working, for them, for the Haredi society, this is the right balance. I mean, 20 years ago, it was just one third who worked, but now It's 50%, and we achieved our goal in the Haredi point of view. I mean, I thought 2 and 3 years ago that there is no chance that this scenario will continue, because I saw the process of integration until 4 years ago. There was a process, and I thought there is no chance that will be the balance and it will continue that way. But the last coalition gave me the impression that there is, let's say, artificial support to the society of learners. The Haredi politicians support it, and the last coalition support this society of learners much more than any coalition. I mean, the ultra-Orthodox politicians are part of the coalition 90% of the time. But this term, they are supporting this society of learners much more than ever. So I can say that this scenario is not just a nightmare. There is a big support for it from the politicians. The second option, the second scenario, is to think about the process that I already mentioned and to believe that this process will continue in the next 20, 30 years. One great example for a kind of ultra-Orthodox society that is more integrated is the ultra-Orthodox society in the United States. You have, two main segments regarding this society. You have the Lithuanian segment, the yeshivish segment, which are studying more Torah, but they are also studying more secular studies. Some of them go to colleges. They earn more money when they work. This is one segment. The other segment is the Hasidic segment. They are studying less secular studies, but they are working. So there is a Haredi model. So we might think that in Israel also the trend would be towards adopting this American Haredi model. And the last scenario is that the Haredim will fully integrated, and their earning and their participation in the labor market, their education system would be changed, and their earning will be like the non-Haredi Jews. These are the scenarios. My main claim is that when you compare the situation right now and the future situation regarding the demographic growth of the ultra-Orthodox, the first scenario is horrible, but even the second scenario, even if the ultra-Orthodox will adopt the American ultra-Orthodox model, it's not enough. It's not enough because the demographic trend is stronger than semi-integration in the labor market. So we need to think, how do we make a real change, more dramatic change in the behavior of the ultra-Orthodox society. And finally, I will refer to how to do it in my point of view. And in order to do it, I think that we need to do some paradigm shift regarding this integration process. There are two kinds of paradigm shifts. One kind is to neglect the previous attitude and to build totally new one. But I want to say that we need to add to the current policy another levels. The first level is connected to the functional level, the foundations of the building, let's say, is the level that's connected to the education system and the labor market. Regarding this level, there are two ways. There is a way that might say we can enforce the ultra-Orthodox to teach secular study. We can enforce them to enlist to the army. I don't believe it's possible. But I believe that especially now, in the current situation, there might be a political situation in order to do a change, that the change will be to condition any financial support with secular study in the education system, to condition financial support to Torah learners in serving in the army, to condition some reduces and some discounts in daycares with working, or municipal taxes in working. All these things, when we will, as a state, we will condition the support in changing the behavior regarding secular studies and integrating in the labor market, will change dramatically the percentage, the schooling teachings. It will change it dramatically. I'm not sure that it will do all the things that we want, but there's going to be a great change. This is the first level. The second level is the current policy. How to do it? I really believe that the current policies, that you can do it by your own way, in your schools or in your own campuses, that's fine with me. I think that it will give them the opportunity to keep their autonomy. But this is just the second level. The first level is the conditions that I mentioned. Second level, you can do it by your own. And this will make us just the third level. It will be left. This is, let's say, the cultural level. I don't believe that regarding the cultural level is connected to the rift that I already mentioned regarding Shabbat, regarding marriage and divorce. I believe that this is the level that we could live with a conflict, and the way to handle it will be mostly in the regional level, meaning, or the municipal level. I mean, in a city or in a region which is more secular, there will be more way regarding to Shabbat, marriage and divorce, things like that. More Haredi towns, it will be different. This is the way to solve it. So the basic level, conditions. The second level, a multicultural way how to do it. And the cultural level by regional solutions. So I can summarize that by the saying of Winston Churchill, that you should never waste a good crisis. And this is the crisis, and the time is now to change it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. All right. First of all, thank you for inviting me again to American University. Last time we spoke on the brain drain. Now we're going to talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is going to enhance the brain drain if we don't deal with it. Basically, we are talking about a situation that is untenable. So just a few words of background. I'm an economist. I'm a macroeconomist at Tel Aviv University. I specialize in economic growth, analysis of long-run trends. And this is basically the perspective that I'm looking at everything that I'm going to show you here. I head the Shoresh Institution for Socioeconomic Research. Professor Eyal Kimchi from the Hebrew University, also an economist, and I from Tel Aviv University, came to the conclusion we're losing the country between our fingers, and we need to focus on the things that will basically keep Israel around for our children and grandchildren in several decades. Because right now we're on a trajectory that's unsustainable, and it has much to do, not just with what I'm going to show you today, but it has quite a bit to do with it. We are an evidence base. We do the research. We assume that A influences B. We test it, but we publish whatever comes out. We take the academic approach, basically, of showing everything. So in view of that, let me show you everything. We have a new government. The Likud, basically, to avoid the possibility of going to prison, the criminal defendant heading the Likud basically was left with no political alternative but to lead his country or his party in a coalition with these 5 parties. United Torah Judaism, Shas, those are the 2 Haredi parties, and 3 other parties which actually ran on one list and then split it apart into 3 parties. These are the individuals heading these parties. So I want to show you a little bit about the relationship with the law. Well, the prime minister is on trial for corruption. The head of Shas was twice convicted for corruption. He sat in jail. The head of Jewish Power, Itamar Ben-Gvir, repeatedly convicted and for incitement to racism. So where's the best place to put a convicted criminal? The head of the police. He's the minister of the police. Bezalel Smotrich, he was arrested, not tried because the Shin Bet didn't want to reveal sources, for being part of a Jewish terror cell that wanted to blow up cars on the Ayalon freeway. Let's talk about the relationship of these parties to society in Israel. The 2 Haredi parties basically insist that Haredim be deprived of a basic education. In other words, in other countries, you have to teach a core curriculum. It can differ from country to country, from area to area, but that is a basic right of children to receive an opportunity for the future. They deprive their children, primarily the boys, of a core curriculum. They get a partial core curriculum until 8th grade, nothing at all afterwards. They demand to be exempt from compulsory military service. And the women basically are deprived of any representation in their parties. So when we talk about this group that's growing and we need to cater to them and help them out, basically what we're saying is, okay, and women who have made any progress, you can't teach them because they're men. You have to sit in the back of the buses when you board their buses and so on and so on. So that's these parties. Let's talk about the other guys. Bezalel Smotrich, this is pre-government when he said we should wipe out Hawara, but these guys are basically racist. There's no other way to put it, okay? In other words, we have one party that is headed by someone who's on trial for corruption. No one would touch him with a stick, basically, except for these guys. 2 Haredi parties and 3 racist parties, Jewish supremacist parties. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show you the fertility rates of these parties. And the problem is that these 5 parties have higher fertility rates than any other population group in Israel. So consequently, what we received now was something beneficial in the sense that we received a 5-alarm warning. This is what the future is going to look like when these guys won't need a criminal or someone on trial for corruption to head the government. They will have enough votes of their own, basically, to create a government in several decades. So this is the warning that we received. What do we do about it? But also, who's voting for these guys? Okay? So the conventional way of looking at political parties is to look at voter turnout. What percentage go out and vote? What I want to show you is the reverse. How many votes did parties get relative to their entire population that's 18 and above? Okay? Haredim, the number of votes that the 2 Haredi parties got is 38% more than the entire adult Haredi population in Israel. So they have like a factor here that basically enhances their power even more because other people are voting for them. Religious Jews, the 3 religious supremacist parties, they receive 94% of the entire population of religious Jews in Israel. Obviously, not all of the religious Jews voted for him. That has to be clear, and probably not all of the Haredi, not probably, I'm sure that not all of the Haredi Jews voted for the Haredi parties. However, these statistics are no less than astounding as far as I'm concerned about how these groups identify with the parties that are basically representing something which represents the end of a liberal democracy in Israel. Now, what these guys did was, in addition to the regular budget, where we already allocate money for Haredi purposes, for settlement purposes, and so on, they went and splurged, okay? They spent just on coalition money, which is usually 1 billion shekels, 2 billion shekels, 14 billion shekels, for specific needs of Haredim and settlers. Now, that doesn't tell you very much, right? So how much does Israel spend just on higher education? All of the universities in Israel, is less than that coalition money, okay? That's our national priorities. Everything that we spend on hospitals in 1 year is less than that coalition. You could fund Rambam Hospital for 10 years. You can fund the Technion for 14 years with the money that we just now are spending on extracurricular things. These are the budgetary allocations. Now, keep in mind that this is just a part of the issue. What they're doing is creating tremendous short-term damage, which is minor compared to the long-term damage. Let me give you an example of the short-term damage. Stock markets in Israel until November 1st basically moved with the US stock market, with stock markets in the G7 countries, the leading developed world countries. They moved pretty much together, so the gap between them was fairly around zero. But if you put $1 in, say, the S&P 500 or another market abroad or in Israel, this is what would happen to your earnings if you put it here versus in Israel. In other words, the markets in these other countries abroad went up while ours went down, okay? That's just short term of people seeing where we're headed, understanding the implication, pulling their money out. When you pull the money out and you're not investing, then it creates a demand for dollars, for foreign currency. It weakens the shekel. We know how to estimate what the shekel should be according to all kinds of economic determinants. This was done by 3 economists at Tel Aviv University and Hebrew University. And you can see that the estimation works really well until January 1st or 2nd, when they announced, 4th actually, when they announced the judicial coup. And then our shekel basically devalued in a huge, huge way. Now, when the shekel devalues, it means that import prices become more expensive. It raises prices of other things in Israel, which already has high prices. So that's just feeding in. What I just showed you is minor details compared to the long-term damage of what these guys are doing, okay? In the sense of they are basically keeping in force schools that, well, let me show you what the schools do, all right? The average level of education in Israel, in the core subjects, the things that we need to work in a modern economy, math, science, and reading. This is the most recent PISA exam. These are all the 25 developed world countries. Israel is at the bottom. This is how we prepare our kids for the future. This is how they prepare their kids for the future. And keep in mind, most of the Haredim, most of the ultra-Orthodox, they don't even study the material. They don't take the exam. This is not because of them, okay? Had they taken the exam, it would be worse. Our entire education system is in the pits. And instead of dealing with the core issues, this is what we've done, okay? Now, we don't really know what the level of education is in core subjects in Haredi schools. We do have an interesting study that was done several years ago by the Bank of Israel, which looked at towns and communities where Shas came in the 90s and put in their schools, Haredi schools, and they could even see within families some siblings that had gone to schools prior to the introduction of the Haredi schools, and then what happened afterwards to their brothers that basically went to the Haredi schools. There was an increase in dropouts by 10%, bagut or matriculation, that fell by 15%, employment rates of brothers, okay? Those who went to Haredi schools, 14% below, annual gross wages. Gilad was talking about wages. If you don't know the material, who's gonna hire you? And if they hire you, what are they gonna hire you for and how much are they gonna pay you, okay? This is the effect. That's one education stream. 2 other Jewish ones are the non-religious, the Mamlachti and the Mamlachti Dati, religious schools. The Mamlachti, the non-religious, are no more than okay. Above the majority of countries, but nothing to write home about. The religious schools in Israel are terrible. They're below 80% of the developed world countries, below 20 of these 25 countries. And when we talk about the kind of education we give our Arab citizens in Israel, it's below many third world countries. In fact, if we compare Arab speakers in Israel to the 10 predominantly Muslim countries that participated in this exam, our kids, our Arab children, are below 9 of the 10 Arab countries. And so this is what we've been doing in the meantime, instead of fixing things, catering to other things. Now, what's the importance of getting a core education? The politicians say, they study Gemara, they study more than we study, which is true, they study more than my students or I ever studied, but they cannot make it up in a year like they say. Now, on the face of it, we take whatever evidence we have and we fit it to the narrative, okay? So we see a lot more Haredi students going to higher education, okay? But that's primarily women. Second, it's not a big deal to look at the total number when the entire population is growing, okay? It has to be relative to size. But most important, one of the studies by one of my teachers once upon a time at the University of Chicago, Jim Heckman, Nobel laureate, one of the things that he showed very convincingly is the importance of reaching children at an early age and teaching them what they need. It doesn't matter if you're Haredi, not Haredi, Jewish, not Jewish. You need to reach children at an early age. That's when it has the biggest effect on their life afterwards. So the fact that they wake up, some of them, not even most, okay, a very small fraction, wake up and want to go to higher education, that's irrelevant. What matters is, what is the share that actually finish? Their dropout rates are outrageous. So the share that finishes relative to prime working age, as a benchmark, this is what it looks like for secular Jews, high and rising more for women than for men, similar to other developed countries. This is what it looks like for Haredim. Nothing is happening here. Possibly for women in the past 2 years, there's an increase, but the fluctuations in the past, be careful with that. But in any event, for the men, absolutely nothing. For 2 decades, if you don't have the knowledge, you cannot overcome it unless you're really, really smart, okay? That's facts of life. Now, take this one step further. When we look at employment over time, 35 to 54 years old, once upon a time, this was a relatively less developed nation. It wasn't a developed country where people that weren't educated with just 0 to 4 years of education, this is men, prime working age men, they could find jobs. A quarter of the men in Israel fit that category, never made it to 5th grade. Since then, we don't have many men that never made it to 5th grade, so the supply dropped precipitously. But who hires such people? The demand for them just wiped out. So the employment fell. When we cut welfare benefits at Rolls recently, and in general, I'm not going to go into the whole story here, this is how economies grow. We need more educated people. They have no problem finding jobs. It may not be the job that they want, but they can find jobs. The lower the level of education, the more difficult it is to find jobs. So where do the Haredim fit? The Haredim men are 16 plus, but it's not what we're talking about when we talk about 16 plus years of education. 2 things here. One is that contrary to conventional wisdom in Israel that Haredim men never worked, they worked. In the late 70s, before they were inundated with welfare and before the economy became such that it needed people with higher education, over 80% of Haredi men worked. So the second question is, who are they most similar to over time? And here's the problem. It also increased when welfare benefits were cut and leveled up. But in general, this group nearly evaporated. This group is growing at a rate that I will show you in just a moment. But basically, it's doubling its share in the population every 25 years. And that's where we're headed. There is also a feeling in Israel that many people are switching. If you grew up Haredi, maybe you're leaving, so maybe things will turn out a different way, or maybe if you're secular, you're becoming more religious. Where are we headed? So this is from the Central Bureau of Statistics. They asked people to define themselves, Haredi, Jewish, I'm talking about Haredi, religious, traditional, secular, and also what were they at age of 15 so that we can see retention rates. So Haredim have the least leakage, least amount of people leave the Haredi community. 89% of those who grew up Haredim remain Haredim. A few become less Haredim. The other group with a very high retention rate are the secular Jews, not as high as Haredim. And then you have a few that are becoming more religious. The group that is really relatively unsuccessful in retaining are the traditional Masorti Jews. About 2/3 of them remain, with nearly a quarter becoming less religious, few becoming more religious. And actually the group that's least able to retain are the religious Jews. Only about half remain religious. Nearly a third become traditional, and nearly a tenth become secular. So on the face of it, if you put Haredim aside, we're becoming less and less religious, right? Not so fast. This is how you can deceive people with data, okay? First of all, are retention rates changing over time? Not really, okay, especially for the groups at the top here. They've been constant for a long time. Second, these guys join them. These guys join those guys, and these guys join the Haredim, and vice versa, okay? What happens when we add all of those who left one group and joined another group? What is the total number relative to the number of Haredim or Masortim and others at 15? You can see the Haredi group actually rose by 18%. Secular rose by 8%. These guys lost a lot, gained a lot. It's a wash. The religious lost a lot, and I'm still deceiving you because I'm leaving out the most important part. Fertility, okay? This is what fertility rates look like. The Haredim could afford to lose 30%, 40%, and still it would just change the rate of the velocity of where we're headed, but we're still going to reach the same place. Okay, so this is the issue here. When we look at all of the population groups in Israel, fertility rates, including non-Jews, this is what it looked like 40 years ago. In general, fertility rates are either relatively constant or declining. They increased a bit for secular Jews, but they rose to roughly where they were 40 years ago. They increased for religious Jews, again, close to what they were in the past. But in general, secular Jews, Christian Arabs, and Druze have roughly 2 children per family. Traditional Jews, about 2.5. With the Muslims in the past 2 decades, as they have a growing middle class, they want to give their children an education, a better education, less children. So that's falling towards 3. Who's not in the picture yet? Haredim. Haredim were essentially not in any government in a significant manner until 1977. Since then, they've become the kingmakers in pretty much every government. And that comes at a price. Stay out of our schools and shovel the money in our direction and keep us out of the draft. This is what happens when the money starts to flow, okay? Basically in 1 decade, the 1980s, the Haredim added a full child to the family. And then they went up above 7 children per family. Then we had the Intifada and a major recession. The government had to cut funding in general, but also welfare benefits that immediately impacted fertility. And then since the money began flowing again, fertility's leveled off. So we are basically talking now at about 6.6 children per family, which means, given everything I just showed you, the share of Haredim in every generation, every 25 years, is doubling. So if we look at all those who were born up until 1925, Haredim represent 1.5% of that population group. When we go to 70-year-olds, they're already up to 3%. 50-year-olds, 6%. So that we don't see many Haredim, adult Haredim. They're not that many. But look what happens when you go to 20-year-olds, 14%. Infants and toddlers, it's nearly a quarter. In other words, in just 25 years, half the infants in Israel are going to be Haredim. What are they going to study? Who's going to support them? Where are they going to work? Who's going to defend them? Who's going to be the physicians? Which brings us to another issue, okay? These are estimates of the Central Bureau of Statistics 40 years down the road of the share of children 0 to 14 years old, okay? In 40 years, roughly 40 years, half the children will be Haredim. This will not happen. I can categorically state this will not happen. What will happen, I have no idea. I can give you 2 alternative scenarios. One is we basically improve all of Israel's education system because it's horrible. On the way, we don't leave anybody aside. We include the Haredim, the Arabs, everybody else, which also means that affects fertility rates in general. So whoever will be here whether it be Haredim or whatever, they'll at least be able to support a first world economy, because otherwise those who live here won't be able to. That's what I just told you now is not on anybody's radar. The other scenario is the default scenario. Keep our heads in the sand, ignore everything. And that means good luck keeping these guys in Israel. Those who can won't be here, there in Israel. Which brings us to one last issue, the population density, which everybody ignores. We're the third most condensed country in the OECD. I'm going to do this really fast because Michael is telling me to shut up and finish. Fertility rates in Israel are like off the charts compared to other OECD countries, which means that in just 9 years, we'll be the most condensed country in the dense country in the OECD, most congested. But why stop there when you're going, you're on a roll, right? So where does this take us? If we take UN estimates of population growth in all of the OECD countries, congestion won't change by much in most of these countries. And then there's us. We are literally leaving behind the developed world, okay? We're just shooting out. In 9 years, we're out of the developed world and heading into the stratosphere. Who's there to greet us? If we take all of the countries in the world and look at, again, UN projections, we're going to be the 10 most congested countries in 42 years. Look at our new friends, okay? These are the people that we're striving to be most similar to right now, unless we get our act together and fix it. Which brings me to the bottom line, which I have to mention here because I think it's fixable. Despite everything I just said, the key to stopping everything I just showed you, it lies within two policy realms that, again, no Israeli leader to date has actually been willing to touch. But we have had now protests at a magnitude that we've never seen, and I'm not sure that any democratic country has seen. We have, for 9 months now, we have days in which over 200,000 people go out in the streets on one night. In American terms, that's 6.5 million people on one night, and doing this continuously for 9 months to defend democracy. People have come out of their comfort zones. People are now in a whole different place. And the question is, can we harness that basically to make some major changes? So what I'm going to show you here, what are the things that I think need to be done? Again, it's on nobody's radar right now. And one of my goals right now is to convince the political leaders, the leaders of the social movement, the protests, basically to provide a vision. Because many Israelis today are thinking about leaving. Because they see this tidal wave approaching and say, even if we win right now and we stop this crazy government, next year, this tidal wave will just sweep away everything anyways in several decades. So why remain? And so if they leave, we basically have all of high tech, all the physicians and all the senior faculty in universities, 400,000 people, 420,000 people in a country of 10 million, that's 4%. You only need several tens of thousands of these guys to get up and leave, maybe just a few thousand. We may win the war, but we'll end up losing the battle if we don't provide them a vision tomorrow morning that there is a future for Israel. That's what's on the line right now, okay? So the first goal is to move Israel to society. I'm really going to finish it in a second. The second one is to safeguard the changes, okay? In terms of moving Israel to a sustainable trajectory, two major items here. One is completely overhauling our really crummy education system. This isn't geared against the Haredim. It's not geared against not geared against anybody. It's doing the right thing in any event. But that also has an effect on fertility. It also has an effect on what kind of people come out of the other end of this education system. They'll have the tools to work. They'll understand what a liberal democracy looks like, what it needs for surviving, and also changing the entire benefit system. We have no clue, no transparency at all. Who's getting the money, how much money they're getting. You just saw a total of 14 billion going to coalition funds, but in general, you take the budget, you cannot break it up and know exactly how much we're paying to different people. That needs to be changed. We have to stop subsidizing lifestyles of non-work. We have to stop subsidizing schools that don't teach what the children need. But, and that's why the second goal here, what happens if we actually have a government that brings together right-wing and left-wing and religious and secular and Arabs and Jews like the previous one, even with wider margins as the polls suggest today, and they are willing to do this, and they are able to do this, what prevents the government afterwards from changing the whole thing, okay? So that's this part. We need electoral reform. We need cabinet ministers that actually understand something in the areas that they are responsible for. A system of checks and balances, that they understand why it's necessary, but also the one that exists between the branches of government. And we need a constitution to set this thing in stone. So all of these two things in and of themselves are necessary, but they'll only buy us 2 or 3 decades before the demography basically can overchange everything. This buys us time to do that. If we don't do this and just do this, it's over. So basically, all this stuff is on the website, the Shoresh website. You're welcome to look for it there. Thank you very much.
So what we just heard, I think, was frightening, but it was very important. It's what happens when ideology and religious fundamentalism take over and get priority over reasonable decisions in politics. And I think in that respect, it's possible to change, of course, and it's possible to change the course. But if demography shows us a different path, it will be harder as time passes. So there isn't much time left. And I think it's really interesting because Israel, at the same time, is also the example of a country that went exactly the other way, from a country which was for a long time seen as part of the developing world and became a first-class economy. So the possibilities are there, and I think it's a responsibility of the political elite to see where we're going. But Ruth?
I'm trying to show something.
Okay.
Yeah, just press play.
And
I'll look it up for you.
you'll join.
I'm trying to bring a little bit of vision and hope. So this is like
we need that.
3 minutes, I think. To give you Michael, generously, first of all, thank you very much, Daniel. I'm a bit shaken, although I live there, but I didn't really know these details. And thank you, my fellow panelists. I want to give a little glimpse of what we do in the Jewish renewal or Israeli Judaism movement. This is, I think, 3 minutes. So let's start with that and I'll catch my breath. It will be magic if it works. What do I touch? So try this. It doesn't go there. So חושבת.
Can you put it on this thing? I'm telling you. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry, it's one more. I just thought about it a minute
It was a last minute.
So it doesn't matter. Okay. תודה.
לעזוב זה?
כן, אני פשוט אדבר.
Okay. Yeah, you want to switch it and show it? And she can show it, or you want to just talk?
No, I'll just start.
Yeah?
Maybe we'll make it from here because we can't have another presentation.
Does it work? Okay, so I'll be very short and say that everything that we heard today is true and very frightening. What I can add to the table, maybe it's very little, but I feel, growing up in Israel in the secular community, first of all, that I am not willing to be a part of a tribe. I'm part of a people. I feel I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew wherever I am, and I feel at home in every synagogue I walk into, and every community in the world that I ever got to. And I'm not giving up this amazing gift that we have, being part of a network of the Jewish people forever. I do feel, growing up secular, that I grew up in some kind of an ignorance vis-a-vis we did get core curriculum, and I can do not so good in math, but in other areas I'm okay. but we were ignorant, or we were educated ignorant, in a kind of a jump from the Bible to Zionism, from King David to Ben Gurion, from King David to David Ben Gurion, not knowing the Mishnah, the Talmud, Kabbalah, Hasidut, the very major building blocks of our culture. And I felt for myself that I'm not willing to not know where I came from, and that it does not belong to anyone else. It doesn't belong to any religious community or leader or rabbi. We were all standing at Sinai, and we all got the Torah, women and men, and all beliefs. And so when I was younger, I founded the first egalitarian Bet Midrash, house of study for women and men, secular through Orthodox, in Jerusalem, called Elul. Elul is now some 30 years old. And then after the Rabin assassination, that's a very long story, I felt I need to go back to Tel Aviv, to the center of secular life in Israel, and build Alma, which is the video I couldn't show, Home for Hebrew Culture, where we do liberal education with a centered focus on Talmud, Mishnah, Kabbalah, Hasidut, and we believe that anyone does not need any base or religious studies from before. In 1 year can feel at home in classic Jewish text, in the Talmud, which is the most challenging one, and all the other writings. It's just the beginning of long life learning, but I feel that changing the public space in Israel from believing that one segment of the population owns Jewish religion and all the rest of us are paying our taxes to keep them going, I think that's a mistake. I think the Torah needs women voices, needs secular voices, needs liberal voices to make it alive, to make it fresh. And we see Alma is now 28 years old, we see that the builders and shakers and gatekeepers of Israeli Jewish culture, the people who are doing fauda and the shtisel and I don't know, whatever you watch here, the people that are writing the music, the people that are writing plays, theater, the fiction writers, the poets, when they come and they are marinated in classic Jewish text for a year or 2 or 5 or whatever they want, they come out and whatever they create is full and rich with the different layers of the beautiful culture that we have and we own. Now, I don't want to make people secular or not secular. It's owned by everyone. But I think there is this mistake that we made ourselves, and Tel Aviv is looked at. And even when you bring missions from America to Israel, they usually take them to Jerusalem for Shabbat, to feel spirituality, and then shopping one day in Tel Aviv before you go to the plane. And I think that's a big mistake. Tel Aviv is a big, deep center of Israeli Jewish culture and other cultures, but I can only talk about what I know, and that we need to support it, we need to make it rich. Now today, I'll just end up saying, and I noticed in what you both spoke about, there's an aim in conquering Tel Aviv. There's a lot of government money going to groups of religious Jews that are coming to build yeshivot in Tel Aviv and try to change the atmosphere from within. So I, of course, welcome anyone who wants to come and live in Tel Aviv. But because the secular side of the government does not see Judaism as something that needs support, because they're secular, and the religious side wants only the Orthodox to be supported, we are left kind of in the middle, in great need of support. You showed numbers, 14 billion. Oh, maybe we shouldn't support anybody. I do believe that the Jewish state should support Jewish culture and Palestinian culture that is citizens of the world, of the state. I don't think that the American way of complete separation of church and state is right for a nation state. I want Hebrew to be the language. I want to be educated about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, not just for religious people. And again, the different cultures should educate themselves. but there needs to be some equality. The people that are giving service, not necessarily army service, it could be civic service, and the people that are paying taxes should have the respectability to get their culture supported in the same way. And honestly, we are supported by American Jewry in a major way because Israel doesn't see us as an important issue. And this, I hope, is something that's going to change in your numbers the next time you show them.
Thank you, Ruth. And those of you who have been to one of those institutions, they know it's really very impressive to think that we have to build bridges in that way. Of course, the other way should also happen. I mean, the Haredim should have.
Of course, but they do in such.
Sometimes I think a birthright program for Israelis within Israel would be good. Send Tel Avivis to Bnei Brak for a year and Haredim to Tel Aviv for a year.
I don't know if you want your daughter to be in Bnei Brak for a year. Let's reconsider that.
But for a week. Let's just.
I think we all walk around Bnei Brak.
And ask my friends who are secular, they've never been to Bnei Brak. And of course, no, really not. And the other way, people don't know the cultures very much. So in that way, your project, I think, is very important. And I hope it will also grow from other sides. So we'll take a few more minutes, and we have Alex back here also.
Thank you, Alex.
We'll shorten our coffee break a little bit, but I would like to give you the chance to ask questions, and we'll take my role as a moderator back here because we're running short of time. Please, if you have questions, is there just one mic? Okay, line up behind the mic. Zach, you start.
All right, hi everyone. Can you hear me? Is the mic working? All right, hi everyone. My name is Zach Ainbinder-Barkley. I'm a senior minoring in the Center for Israel Studies. First, I want to thank our panelists for taking the time to come over here and really introduce and discuss some of this groundbreaking stuff. So my question for you is, why is it that we're seeing such lower trends in education for Israeli Arabs, as Muhammad excellently pointed out, but they're becoming more and more of a critical part of the workforce, while it is that we're seeing essentially this, in effect, reverse effect for Haredim? And what do you guys see to be that primary solution? How can we essentially work to better integrate the Haredim into society?
Thank you. Let's take another question. Sophie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie. I'm also a student here at AU and a Center for Israel Studies intern. My question is, if we're seeing these demographic changes and the statistics really are this bad, what reasonable path towards passing these policy forms exist? I mean, as you guys said, they are very necessary, but how do we pragmatically implement them, especially given how far right the coalition is?
I'll answer
yeah.
the first. Yeah. With regard to why the kids are doing bad in school, there's a very strong relationship everywhere in the world between parental education and the success of children in school. And what you want a public education system to do is to be able to overcome that and basically create opportunities for children whose parents are relatively uneducated. We just did a study now at Shoresh comparing Israel to a benchmark group of 5 countries that have excelled consistently in the PISA exams to see just how much we are able to, how close we come to these countries in terms of removing this relationship, and we're not. The gaps between children with educated parents and children that have uneducated parents are double in Israel those in other countries, and this is even after controlling for how many books at home and whether a whole host of other issues. Still, it comes down to a really crummy education system, unable to overcome the baggage from home, and that is basically causing the future inequality to be very, very high as a result. With the question of can we implement these things? Right now, no. we have a government that's just doing the opposite. The problem is that the leadership of the Haredim and the religious parties in Israel, I'm not talking about the religious and I'm not talking about the Haredim, even though some of this also applies to them, are very cynical. There's nobody to talk to here. And so what this means is we need a government of the type we had before that has right wing, it has religious, it has secular, it has everybody else except these leaders. And we have to basically fix things for their children. We have to give Haredim an education system that is not controlled by political parties. Same thing with the religious parties. Those two streams, the religious streams and the Haredi streams in Israel, are basically controlled or very heavily influenced by political parties that have a very, very specific goal, and it's not one of a liberal democracy that we all have to live in. They want to utilize the democracy to get rid of the democracy, and that means there's nobody to talk to here. And we need to face the facts, and we need to deal with it, and we still have a majority, because in 20, 30 years, we won't have a majority. This is our time. We need to get our act together, whether we will or we won't. You see how many people are protesting in the street. Again, if we can harness that energy to do what we need to do, this isn't left wing versus right wing. This is liberal Israel versus an intolerant Israel. And by the way, people here have a vested interest in what's happening in Israel. And I have to add that as well. Because you should care if we're going to be a liberal democracy or a racist country, because that's going to have major ramifications for how Jews are being defined in other countries in the world. So you need to be, this is your game too. It's not just providing a safe haven for Jews in times of stress and a home for us. This is about saving Israel for all of us. Who knows when you need it, but also you want an Israel that you can be proud of and not one that your neighbors are going to be using to attack you.
I want to refer to two things. The first is, I'm not sure that I agree with you, Ruth. I think that the equation that you made between the Haredim and the secular people in Israel, it's not a right equation, because the Haredim, the change that Dan and I talked about, it is existential change that we need to make in their behavior, in their participation in the, it's existential to the future of the state of Israel. You talked about cultural change that you offer to the secular people.
Nice to have.
In my point of view, it's nice to have. I mean, some of them will adopt it. Others would say, and most of the secular Jews says, we are, even if we identify ourselves as secular, we are partly traditional. We speak in Hebrew, we celebrate the holidays and other things. I'm not sure that most of them will want to study Talmud.
Let me try to answer.
But it's not crucial. This is the point.
Is not identical to atheist.
Yeah, you're right. But I mean, it's not existential, it's not crucial.
Let me try to answer you. I hear you. I think that's said to me a lot. What I think is that the fact that the seculars feel the secular majority and most of the politicians feel that they do not own their culture, and that the authentic Jew, just a minute, I'm talking now and I listen to you. And they feel that the authentic Jew is the Orthodox guy of Shas or Haredi. And whenever there is a discussion, they usually defer to them to say the real Jewish thing, as long as they won't, not everyone, but the intellectuals, the leaders of the thought, will own and know that I read this Talmud, I know what it means, and there's no reason for only men to talk in the marriage unless the reason in the Talmud is because a man can take another wife and a woman will not be able to take two men. If you know that when you read it, once you come and talk to the rabbi, you can answer. So ignorance is weakness. And the reason, the deep reason, existential, cultural reason for the weakness of the secular side, that is still the majority, is because they do not own their Jewishness. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I think.
So I just want to add, to refer to it, it's not just that I think that it's not existential, even more. I believe that most of the tradition, I studied a lot of Jewish tradition, it is not democratic, it doesn't have equal rights to minorities, civil rights, other things. This is most of our Jewish tradition. And we need to live with that to understand that. So if we would say, okay, on one hand, we want democracy, but on the other hand, we want to adopt the Jewish tradition. So the claim of the ultra-Orthodox will be much stronger. They would say, according to our tradition, we don't need a full democracy. This is not the Jewish tradition. You can study it on the Talmud, the attitude to Gentiles and other things. And they will win us according to the interpretation of the tradition. But if we talk in a secular language, in a modern language, we have more chances. So this is the reason why I don't agree with you.
Please. Just 1 minute. I'm not talking about adopting the culture as it was. I'm a daughter of a Sephardic father. He was the loveliest, smartest, loving, wonderful man. He was a chauvinist. He was a Sephardic chauvinist. Now, I'm his daughter. I'm continuing his legacy. I love him desperately. I'm a feminist. So adopting Jewish culture was racist and chauvinist in some parts, and you don't want to be a woman in the 5th century, and thank God I was born now. But this is who I am. And I need to go on from where I am. First of all, to know where we come from, and then to decide what we are doing with it. Same goes for other cultures that we share the country with. So ignorance is always weakness. Now, once you know your parents, you're not necessarily aware that you like them until you see them in the mirror and you say, when did I become so like my father? But I think the same love, this is the Jewish heritage. We can't adopt another one. The same kind of love does not make you go on and do the same thing. You need to own and then to be free to change.
Welcome to Israeli discussions.
So,
We'll take the last three
thank you.
briefly and brief answers, and then we'll have a brief coffee break.
So if we really are concerned most about the most existential threats caused by the rifts in Israeli society, are we ignoring the elephant in the room in this whole discussion? There are more Arabs than there are Haredim, and their level of education is even worse than the Haredi level of education. Sorry, their income is even as bad as the Haredi. Okay, but it's pulling down the whole Israeli thing. Okay, and the rate of growth is not a problem, but the rate of growth is gigantic, potentially, if you consider the fact that the settlements have included millions of Palestinian Arabs within Israeli control. So that's the biggest demographic threat, is the settlement project, which is no one's mentioned. That's the real demographic threat, not the Haredi one. And their gap is gigantic, particularly if you include West Bank Palestinians, where the settlements are where the settlements are. So are we ignoring the elephant in the room when we talk about which rifts are existential to an existential threat to Israeli life?
Let's just take the two others briefly. Don't forget that.
My name is Brian Davis. I'm a professor in the School of Public Affairs. So I have two very brief questions. One for Don. All of what you pointed to is as a result of various agreements that have been made in various coalitions over many, many years. And so my question for you is, how does it even seem possible, other than a very unlikely scenario of a coalition coming together that can implement even a portion of what it is that you're saying? And the second, for the panel as a whole, is there a point at which the Dati Leumi and the Haredim break apart in this coalition over the issue of budgets? Because in the past there have been collapses because they have been competing for a similar pot of money.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe this is too big a question for this one panel, but there were two comments that really struck. One is, you shouldn't waste a good crisis. Two, there was a half a slide on what a constitution should look like, which was basically lots of what we call in the law conclusory statements. Okay, so whatever this is, whatever the demographics, this is a very diverse country now. What is this? How do you take the energy of the protests and convert that into constitutional reform? Who's leading that? Who's seriously thinking about it? And And what are the characteristics of that constitution? And sorry, second. Okay. And second, what is the role of American Jews in incentivizing, with tough love or otherwise, to incentivize people to work together towards a better system of governance?
Thank you. And I also want to include Alex in case you want to address any of the questions. Maybe you want to go ahead?
Very briefly.
Very briefly, that's good.
Yes, very briefly indeed. Far be it from me to insert myself into these debates over Israeli culture and its relevance or otherwise, but I think it does bring up something really crucial, which is that one of the things that we're seeing here, which is affecting, yes, Haredim and yes, the religious Zionists, but also secular Zionists in Israel, is essentially the cultural decay that we're all experiencing in this kind of late stages of neoliberal capitalism, where many cultures in the United States, Israel, and many other places as well are experiencing the loneliness and the cultural decay and the lack of solidarity and unity and the end of ideology that comes about when we look at society purely through sort of economics terms and sort of big data ideas. What Israel used to have was a pretty unifying ideology that certainly did not include everybody in Israel, and that was a real deficiency there. But what we're seeing now with the protests on the streets on both sides is a desperate thirst for some kind of idea-making narrative in Israeli society, which, and it's the vacuum of that since the 90s that I think is part of what's led to this situation. And if we can find some kind of meaning-making sort of new myth of Israeli society that is tolerant, inclusive, and positive, I think that could really help the situation.
And maybe we'll go this way, Gilad.
I just want to say one thing regarding the question of what does we had to do now, and I refer to ourselves as I can say researchers or advisors to policymakers, and also people who lives here and have some connections and influence on Israel. I think that the main goal, the program of what to do, I tried to show it, and Dan showed it, I think, and there are no gaps between us. The concept is quite clear. What do we need to do? The question is political question. We need to convince, especially the center and the moderate right wing, that this issue, the integration of the ultra-Orthodox society, is one of the main issues for us, for the state. And the result will be that the next government, if they will be convinced that this is the main issue, the next government, unlike the previous government that was a government without Haredim, but didn't do enough. They had the reasons, but they didn't do enough in order to do a change. The next government should put it in as a main effort of the government, and this would do the change. I believe that there is a chance for that. Thank you.
I want to say I agree very much to what Alex said, and I think people want to be demanded from, not less but more, to ask for something big to give in their life. And I'm looking at these impressive students in front of me, and I want to say to you that Israel and the Jewish people do need you. And we need the good people to throw themselves in to make the good guys win, to make Israel united again, focus on the elephant in the room, as you said, as well as all the elephants that we are. And we need that spirit of what I feel in the demonstrations, and you are invited to come and feel it yourselves, that people feel that they are making a difference and that they fight for the good. And the solutions about what to do to them is secondary. First, to know that we have a vision, that we know why we are here, and that we can make a difference. So,
elephants. The Palestinian elephant in the room is part of the reason why we're at where we are today, because it was very convenient for the left not to work with the right not to work with the left, So who are our kingmakers? The guys who don't care about any of that stuff. Just give us money, stay out of our schools, let us stay out of the army, and we'll vote whatever you want, okay? And that's been happening since the late 1970s, and it's gotten us in this position. So if we look at it directly, right now, half the children in Israel are getting a third world education, okay? You saw the Arab kids below most of the Muslim countries have participated in the exam. They're nearly a quarter, 23% of the first graders last year. Haredi children, 21% of the children in first grade last year. And then we have the periphery, social periphery, geographic periphery. Half the children in today's Israel are getting a third world education. They belong to the fastest growing parts of the population. So when they grow up, they will not be able to support a first world economy, only a third world economy. A third world economy that they can support cannot maintain a first world healthcare sector, a first world welfare sector, but more importantly, most importantly, in a country whose neighbors don't really like us, is a first world army. We will not be able to defend ourselves. That makes it existential, okay? Now, when you talk about the Palestinians, who in their right mind wants to add several million more people, forget Palestinians, not Palestinians, several more people that are relatively uneducated to a country that's already on the highway to hell in any event, okay? I mean, this just makes us zoom a lot faster down that highway. So I'm ignoring, obviously, the issue itself, which is a big issue. It's an important issue. We should have done a lot more about it, in my opinion, in any event, but I'm not going into the politics. I'm going into the economics. Israel is already, we're on the last exit from the highway to hell right now. The last thing we need is to step on the gas and add these guys and make them a part of the population. Okay, so that's issue number one. How to implement it, no problem, okay? We have this minor issue here of having to work together, except that we actually did that. The previous government basically gave an example to mankind in the Western world how very far right and very far left can work together with religious people, with secular, with Arabs, with Jews. We did it. The margins were so narrow that it just took one person to leave and bring the whole house of cards down. But look at the polls today. Many of the people who voted for Likud weren't part of this Bibi cult. And they weren't about now basically destroying the future of Israel. And when we look at the polls today, who knows? They may not last. But we're talking about a government that, I don't know who will lead it, but something similar to what we had before with larger margins of error, larger margins that they can basically implement if they decide to implement, because this is also a prisoner's dilemma. If they don't change the electoral system, then basically each of the leaders is going to be thinking, well, next time I'm going to have to deal with the Haredim, even if they're not in right now. That's why we need to change the system. Okay? And if we change the system, we also need a constitution, which makes it difficult to go back. So I'm not a legal scholar, far be it from me to talk about what needs to be in, but the common theme today in Israel is a very simple constitution that is based on our Declaration of Independence, which outlined how Jews should behave in a Jewish country, which is completely different from how the Jewish parties in Israel, the religious parties, behave. It has nothing to do with what they're doing. It has everything to do with what Gilad is describing as being Jewish, okay? It's human rights, civil rights, women's rights, children's rights, respecting the minority, understanding the difference between the majority rule and the tyranny of majority, okay? That's not even taught in their schools. So now they're saying, we have a majority. Why are you bothering us? Okay, but you can't do whatever you want. You cannot just implement. So,
thank you. This was, I would say it was quite painful discussion, but it was very, very important to listen to these things, because very often when we look at Israel or go to Israel, we see one Israel. Tel Aviv, secular, certain circles. There are many Israels. And I think what this discussion showed us is we're at the crossroads. What is the Israel of the future? And American Jews and Americans in general have also some influence, some voice of how this Israel will look like. Not as much, not citizens, but it's still very important. And I would like to thank you all. I'm seeing students, when students stay longer than their class time is, that's a good sign that the discussion is going well. many of the questions addressed here and which might have not been answered will be answered probably in the 2 other rounds that are coming. We'll make a short coffee break, 15 minutes, and then we'll start in 15 minutes the next